let me know.
Okay, it's recording.
Let's go. So, hello everyone. I'm trying to focus so I can see your faces. There we go. So, a little bit about myself. My name is Guillermo Ripa. I'm a machine learning engineer here at Trial Labs. It's been a year and a half already. And today we'll be presenting the video inference for human body pose and shape estimation. So this is a paper that came out late 2019, and it was presented on 2020's CVPR. That's a very important computer vision focused conference. So a little bit more about guided lectures. These guided lectures are a space we have here at Trial Labs to stay ahead of the curve. So we present and discuss between us recent scientific research papers in the field. And as two colleagues put it, Facundo and Gonzalo are here today with us. It's a non-lonely way to navigate the scientific research ocean. So since the world pandemic, we decided to open these instances up for public, so you can join us and discuss with us. So feel free to ask any questions or share any experiences you may have. So let's get into the paper. I'll play this video. I hope you're not very distracted by it. But the idea of this paper basically is to take a video and frame by frame, detect all human bodies in it and detect their poses in 3D and also body shapes. So this is done, they're very good architectures that do this for still frames. So you give it a picture and it'll give you the body and the shape for that still frame. But here what they do, they extend that a little bit more and try to give us a model that we can use for video also. And the trick there is that, for example, if we use one of the still models and use it in a video, it doesn't include like the temporality of human motion, and so it'll end up in very jittery poses. This done from the Greatest Showman is great, but I think we have some other cool examples. So what we'll have at the end of the inference of video is we'll have a humanoid 3D mesh that we can use in not only like we see here and put it over the video, but also we can export that and use those vertices in any other context that we want. Some more examples there. So this is what I mean by that we can use it any other place. We can rotate over the image, and this is the 3D model, the 3D output. Okay, so how did they do this? So the whole architecture actually has three parts. Here on the left, we have the generator that will take frame by frame the video and output the pose and shape of the subjects it detects in a format that we'll explain a little bit more later on. Then on the right side, we have this AMAS dataset. It's a very recent dataset, and the cool thing about it is that it has a lot of human poses and sequences of motion, and they output it in a universal format that we'll discuss later on. And because of this cool dataset, what they were able to do is do an adversarial training for this model. And what that means is that we'll also have a motion discriminator that will tell us if the sequence of motions that we give it are either fake or real. So the cool thing about that is that we'll be able to train the generator with a lot less data, because we only need to care about having a good motion discriminator to say, like, in a way. And what that means is, for example, that will be training the generator and the motion discriminator together. So step by step. Imagine that if we had a very good motion discriminator from the beginning, the generator would never be able to tell if their poses are good or bad, because the motion discriminator will always detect them as fake. So the idea, just to go over it again, it's very simple. We'll have the generator, which will output a sequence, and the motion discriminator will try to define if it's fake or if it's real. If the motion finds it, if the discriminator tells us that it's a real motion, then there'll be a reward for the generator, and it will be used as a punishment for the discriminator. And it also goes the other way around. If the generator outputs a sequence and the discriminator finds it as fake, we'll be able to punish the generator in a way and also reward the discriminator because it found it correctly. But to train the discriminator, that's where the AMAS dataset comes in, and we'll use it as ground truth to train the discriminator in finding good and bad sequences. And then for inference, what we'll do is we'll discard this discriminator and of course the dataset, and we'll be just left with the generator. So we'll be able to give it a sequence or a video, and it will give us all the poses that it finds in that video. Okay, so
meta
that's
question
the
here,
overview.
Billy, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Yeah, the question is whether you're taking questions now or at the end of the whole guided lecture.
No, let's do it in the middle. Go ahead.
Okay, then I have another question, and that is, I know that motion capture has been done for at least a decade now, but mostly uses very complex equipment. It's like the main idea of this paper is to be able to use motion capture without having to have all the equipment related to motion capture, just to be able to do it on a single video. Is that something the paper talks about, or do they just leave it as a known fact?
So do you mean if the main idea is to create artificial motion capture information?
No, I mean because I mean, we can already do motion capture. It's just that you need a bunch of nodes and the person needs to be in a very specific place, and you just have to hook them up to a bunch of cables, whatnot. I guess the main point of something like this is not to beat such a system in performance, but rather just to be able to do it on any video and not have to have that kind of equipment? Or are they actually trying to beat the more traditional forms of motion capture?
No. The objective that they put out, it's very generic, and I was gonna talk about it at the end, but they said that they want to understand human behavior. So that's very vague. I think one of the cool things that this is able to do is that you can record any video in the wild and not be constrained to, as you mentioned, having a studio that constrains you a lot. I think that's the main takeaway. They're not trying to beat motion capture done properly, if you may.
Got it.
So let's get into more details of each part. So first we have the generator, and so the architecture of the generator is we have a pre-trained CNN that was trained on still images to find pose and shape estimations. So it's basically a feature structure that outputs a 2048 vector size vector. And then we have two stacked GRUs, and we'll explain this a bit later, specifically. But the intuition here, these GRUs are the ones that are actually the temporal encoders, and are the ones that retain the information of previous and future poses. So these are bidirectional. So we'll give the video left to right, temporally correct, and then we'll reverse it and give it back to the GRUs. And so there, the GRUs are able to retain information of what came before and what came after to end up giving a better estimation of the current pose. And then we have the regressor, that it's just two fully connected layers. And then we use a residual, the residual vector, to be able to remember the original feature vectors. So we'll have, for the final regressor, we have the features extracted by the CNN and the latent vectors that we found with the temporal encoder. And finally, we have a final regressor that outputs that vector of size 85, which will give us both shape and camera parameters. Did I explain it? Any questions there?
Yep, sounds good. I do have a question though, which is from what you mentioned, you're also giving it the frames in the opposite order. Does that mean that it's not really thought to be used for streaming, or is there some other way to use it when you're actually streaming data and you won't have the later frames to fit the model?
That's a great question. Yeah, one of the main drawbacks that I found is that this current architecture cannot be used in a real-time fashion. So because of those bidirectional GRUs, you won't be able to just stream video and find the poses, the current poses. But as 2-minute papers said, 2 papers down the line, we'll surely be able to do it. So I was stopped in a deal there that I didn't mention in the overview, and that's the camera parameter. So the regressor outputs pose, shape, and camera parameters for every frame. And the thing there that I wasn't quite like paying attention in the beginning was that you also need to know from which perspective and at which distance you're seeing the model, I mean the subject, to be able to overlay it in the video. So I thought that was very interesting. And okay, so more detailed GRUs. So GRUs are basically newer LCTMs. And so for the ones that don't know much about LSTMs, they're like neural networks that try to remember what they saw before. So they try to give like memory of past inferences. And the intuition here is that if we have like an ambiguous frame or the body is partially occluded in a frame, because we saw previous and forward frames, we were able to have enough information to make a good body pose inference there. And also the idea is the temporal encoder is able to capture this sequence of the human motion, as we mentioned in the beginning. And then finally, we have this other trick, and this is the simple model. So we mentioned in the beginning that the AMAS dataset had a universal format, and that the generator outputs this universal format, and this is the simple model. So the fun thing about the simple model is that it uses a skinning method, which sounds really weird, and that's a theme all over this paper, but the good thing is that they envelop an underlying skeleton with a surface. In this case, they're triangle meshes. And the thing is that this mesh deforms with the skeleton beneath it. And so this is from a previous paper. And what they were able to do is they took high resolution 3D scans of different subjects and the CSER dataset, which is basically a database of human measurements. Again, kind of creepy, but they were able to end up with a body format that can be calculated from a linear model. So you'll give it parameters, and here the parameters are a vector of size 72 and for pose, and a vector of size 10 for shape. And playing with those two values, you can already move a mean humanoid mesh into the pose and shape that you want. And that's what it's used. That's what used in the generator and on the AMAS dataset.
a question about this. So
Mhm.
you have 72 values for pose, but this is only like key points of the skeleton, or do they include like key points on the top of the mesh, for example? I don't know if the eyes or what. Like, what do they use for pose? Is it like you have a skeleton and then you put a mesh with flesh or fake flesh above that, and you can deform that? That's the idea here.
Yeah, so the idea is that you start from this mean body that I think it's like in a T-cross position.
Mm-hmm.
And with those values, you are able to move those, which are 3D vertices, and move those into a human pose. And that's one of the other drawbacks. I mean, you can see it as both, but you'll always infer people with 2 legs and 2 arms and a head. So, for example, if the body is occluded, the output of the video will still be 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head.
Yeah. So the mesh is put after you have the position of the body calculated. So it's not like you are regressing a perfect match of the mesh to the body that you see. You just have like you imagine a skeleton, and then you put a fake body above that, and then you'll see that they mismatch the size and proportions of the final body in the videos.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay.
And I've got a question related to that. The 10 points that you learn of the shape, are they like width or things that help you create the mesh?
No, I think that's a latent vector space. So it's not that every parameter every index of the shape means something. It's just a representation.
But what kind of information do you learn from the shape?
So what they do with the linear regressor, it's not actually like measurements, but deformations that you want to give it to like the significant parts of the body that move accordingly to the data set that you had. So it'll give this is like the 3D scans. And I have a video that I may find quickly enough that shows the deformations that it does. And I don't think the human eye could detect actually what you want to deform, but that's the magic of this model. Let me pull it up.
So that 10-dimensional embedding sort of gives information on how the shape should be like twisted or changed.
Yeah. So how much you want to move the vertices from the mean to your final pose, your final shape.
Okay.
I have it here. I'll switch. You can see the simple page.
Yeah.
So for example, here we have the same poses having different shapes. And then it was later on, here's comparisons of different models. There you can see how it deforms the body to find different shapes. There. So going back to the notion. So finally, we get to the AMAS data set. And what they did is they took over 300 subjects and made them do a whole bunch of motions and ended up with 40 hours of motion data in this simple body format. And that's what's used in the motion discriminator as ground truth. Okay, so we had the temporal encoder, and here comes the motion discriminator. So the architecture is very similar. In the middle, for as of the temporal encoder, we have two stacked GRUs. And just in case it's confusing you, the architecture can be seen as one column of this figure, but here it's like the GRU is unfolded. So because the GRUs have a hidden state to like remember the past or the future, depending on the sequence that you give it, that's why we have I like a lot of columns here. It's like the unfolded view. Okay, so we have the same two stacked GRUs and the two feed-forward layers. And the interesting thing is that the motion discriminator also adds a self-attention mechanism. So here the thing is that when you have processed the whole video, because the GRU remembers has like past information, you'll have a summary on the last inference of all the frames. But the thing is that they wanted to give more information, to give weights to frames that have more importance in the middle of the video and not only have the last one. So you want to have, again, that human motion and evaluate over all of that. So just an idea of self-attention. So it started with, in the world of NLP, when you wanted to have information of maybe a translation, you want to have information not only of the word, but the words that were around it. And so, for example, in this translation, you want to switch the places of the verbs. And that's when self-attention comes in handy. And so for here in the video, the good thing about having this self-attention mechanism is that you can give different importances to different frames. So for example, if you have a frame that has very heavy occlusion, or that has a multi-person occlusion, or the figure is ambiguous, you can give less attention to that one and just pay attention to the rest. And here in the paper, they mentioned they did an experiment of doing average and max pooling for the extraction of the different frames, and it had a worse performance. So self-attention was producing a really good result for defining which frames were the most important. But we never said how they actually connect. So why adversarial? And here's the loss for the generator. So here in the loss, we have the 3D loss, which actually I kind of lied in the beginning. They not only used the adversarial framework to train, they also did some classical training. So they used 2D key point datasets to define the 2D loss. So you had key points of the subjects, and from the body mesh that you end up with, you can calculate the key points and define your error of that difference. And they also had 3D joint labels, and so 3D datasets basically. And so they could also measure the differences between those estimations. And one other thing they did was use a loss of the difference in the sample parameters. They had this 3D PW dataset and a human 3.6 that have sample parameters. So they did a loss with that. But the most important or interesting novel thing of this paper was the adversarial loss. That's the one we mentioned in the beginning. Okay, so
sorry, Ili,
evaluation.
Question.
There we can see that these are the two comparisons that they do, and let's explain these measures a little bit. So these metrics, we have
Hi.
the PA. This first one is I can remember the name, but yeah, forecasted align mean per joint position error, and the forecasted align is basically a transformation that takes your body and overlays it with the one that you're trying to estimate. Then we have a common mean per joint position error. This is per vertex error. So when you have the body mesh, the acceleration, and this is a cool one. Here, the acceleration is where the joints should be in the motion. So most previous work was really bad when using.
Can you hear us now?
They're telling me that people are talking, but I can hear a thing.
Nope. Hi.
Let's see now.
Hi.
Hear us now?
Can you hear us now?
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Yay.
Okay. I had a question. Like a minute ago. From the losses that you mentioned. The simple loss, that one was calculated from a data set where you had all the simple parameters annotated for a video, like that data set has posted for every frame.
Yeah, exactly.
Or how? Okay, yeah, because that sounds like a lot of work. So yeah, I suppose that was not a big data set. Like I don't know how much that influenced the training.
No, for example, the AMAS dataset has these sample parameters, and you can think that, for example, if you have a 3D dataset that has values for every vertex on every frame, for one person, that would actually be a bigger dataset. I'm not sure the sizes of these two, but yeah, it means that they have the parameters for all
frames
in each frame for all bodies. They're usually one-bodied datasets also. So one video has one person only.
Right.
Sorry, I don't know if I missed any more questions.
I think you're good.
I have one question, which is it seems initially weird that the way they say they calculate the loss. I don't know if they're just simplifying it in the sense of not mentioning weight parameters for the different parts of the loss. But in principle, if you're not weighting the different losses and they may have different ranges in size, let's say, that would give you a weird result. So it seems at least interesting that they don't have any alpha, beta, etc. parameters to weight each of the different losses and mention what happens if you change the different weights or so on. Maybe they do, but I didn't.
Yeah, they don't mention having any weights, but they do the training like in steps. So for example, the simple loss is only used in the end. Just say we were talking that they do ablation experiments. And so here in the evaluation, you can see that they have a direct comparison and the final like vibe. And the direct comparison is when they train only using the 3 losses that don't include the simple model, the simple loss. So maybe that's like, they didn't always use in every step all the losses at the same time, and this is more like a diagram of the final result. But yeah, they don't mention doing any weightings of the losses in the paper.
Do we have a code implementation of this included in the paper?
Yeah, so yes, CVPR has really encouraged people to do code with papers so they can be reproducible. And they have their code, I think I have it somewhere. I can paste it in the chat later. If anyone has it, please do. And they have the code, not only the code, but also a Jupyter Colab that you can do to interactively do demos. And that's the one we use for the demos that I'll show in a second. Yeah, the only thing about evaluation is that you can see that they're definitely doing really good for they're like a state-of-the-art solution. For frame-based models, they do a lot better. They only do worse in this specific data set on the mean per joint position error after alignment, and on all the others, they're very comparatively better. And here we have an example of side by side. You can see that one of the drawbacks is the acceleration. Here, the temporal HMR was a model that it's called human mesh recovery, and they try to find actually the mesh. So as Alan mentioned before, they try to find every vertex, and they do an extension and they do a temporal model, a very simple temporal model. And you can see that in between frames, you lose a lot of information of the acceleration. So it's aligned a lot worse, and when you have like quick motions. But this is probably mostly cherry picked because it's in the paper. But yeah, evaluation shows that they're a really good solution. And finally, here we have some demos. So kudos to our colleagues that volunteered for these. And one thing I want to test it with this demo is what happened when you move around the subject. So before, I thought that you had to keep like a still perspective on the camera, and it clearly isn't the case. So one other thing to mention is that the outputs, the shapes outputs are unisex, so they don't have gender, they're gender neutral. And the other cool thing to mention is that they do, for each frame, they calculate the new pose, but when calculating shape, they do an average of the shapes calculated for the whole video to keep it more consistent. I thought that was really interesting. And here we can see one of the drawbacks that this paper has. When you have multi-person occlusion, you can see that it changed color, so it lost track of the first subject. And that's something that they mentioned, that they don't do any kind of tracking, so no Kaplan filters or anything. So when you have multi-person occlusion, it doesn't work really well. And this is a demo I added today because I was astonished of how well it does. So we have a figure skater that jumps in the air, and you can see that it finds really good results when jumping and doing very quick motions. Okay, so use cases. The paper was very vague, as we said in the beginning, but some applications that at least we discussed and I can think about is very easy to create 3D models. So you don't need all that equipment of motion capture to have a baseline of a 3D model that you can use in an application. Something we didn't mention is that this simple model, because of the skinning method that they use, the blend skinning, is supported in most graphic pipelines. So you can use it in any game engine or 3D engine that you want. You can just use the output of the regressor. So the body after the regression, after the parameters, and you can start using it. So you can create very good 3D models very quickly based only on video. Then another one that it's been used in professional sports more recently is athletic performance assessments. So having the 3D views, you can move around a subject and detect if their form was correct or if they had the correct acceleration that you wanted in a certain task. And this last one is also kind of the first one, you can extend motion capture datasets starting from a good base, and you can adjust based on something that you already have overlaying the model. And the current drawbacks we mentioned already, but this bidirectionality, not being able to use it real time, I also think is a huge drawback for this architecture, and the multi-person tracking and heavy occlusion that we mentioned earlier. So yeah, this is basically the paper. The thing I loved about it is that it uses like a lot of cool stuff, one over the other. So it's like construction of years and years of research from different teams. So I think it reflects the good stuff of the research community. And yeah, that's it.
Did they explain why they're using a bidirectional GRU, or did they do any kind of ablation study on trying a unidirectional GRU or something like that? Just
They
trying to
actually
understand
don't
why,
mention, yeah,
why they're doing that. They don't
yeah. So they want to have really good fidelity of the kinematics of human motion, and that's what I think that they care about, seeing like future frames. That's the only reason I can think of. And in the paper, they just go over it and mention that they use bidirectional gyros, but only that. Yep.
Okay. I don't know
if we have any questions in the chat. Okay. If not, thanks everybody for coming, and see you in the next one.
Thanks, Billy. See ya.
Thank you.
Hey.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.